All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another session of the Beyond Access series. We're so excited to have Cerebral Palsy Foundation back with us to continue this series. And today we're going to be talking about breaking down stereotypes and shifting attitudes. We're really excited to review the importance of authentic representation in books, TV, film, media, ads, social media, because if you can see it, you can be it. So really excited for folks to be here with us again. Rachel, thanks for hanging out with us for the past couple of weeks. Before we get started, I'm going to hand it over to Ori for some quick housekeeping announcements.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Jose, for that intro. I just want to, give a couple of reminders to everyone who's joining today's webinar. First off, as always, there will be no chat function, but we do have the Q&A function open. So obviously feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. We will try to answer as much as we can throughout the webinar, but don't worry, we do set a time at the end of the session here, about like 10 minutes, to be able to go over the questions that you ask, and you'll be able to ask more questions then. So obviously just be on the lookout for that. And as well, obviously, we just want to make sure that you're aware that we do record these webinars and we do post them on our YouTube page the day after. So look out for an email tomorrow regarding today's recording. And if you don't follow our YouTube page, please go and follow, and we have some great content. And obviously this will be posted tomorrow. But without further ado, we want to continue with the Just Say Hi webinar series here. We're on part 4, as Jose said. So I'm going to hand it over to Rachel.
Thank you so much, Ori, and obviously thank you, Jose, for this opportunity and this wonderful webinar series. I'm just going to share my screen. And so, as mentioned today, we're really going to be talking about breaking down stereotypes. And my name is Rachel Byrne. I am the Executive Director at the Cerebral Palsy Foundation. I am a white woman with long brown hair. I'm wearing a black top and sitting in front of a white wall. And so today we will intentionally be varying our language usage between person-first language and identity-first language. And that's to really respect the different perspectives of the disability community. And so when we think about, what is today about? Well, diversity, equity, and inclusion are important pillars for successful outcomes in any school. And so with that being said, though, disability has yet to be fully integrated into this conversation. So the work that we've set out with these webinars really looks to elevate, broaden, and deepen the conversation, integral between all collaborators, including obviously students with disabilities, their allies, and really most importantly, you, their families. We understand that change takes time, patient commitment and accountability, and we thank you all for being here today and really thank the Beyond Access team who has elevated this work. So this quote from Sinead Burke really perfectly subverts many of the tropes of disability when we're thinking about breaking down stereotypes. Disability is articulated as a struggle, an unnecessary burden that one must overcome to the soundtrack of a string crescendo. But disabled lives are multifaceted, brimming with personality, pride, ambition, love, empathy, and wit. So what are stereotypes? And people with disabilities certainly aren't immune to stereotypes. In fact, the community is regularly subjected to negative stereotypes. And these stereotypes are the fixed general images or sets of characteristics widely believed to represent a specific group of people. And common stereotypes that you might have seen around disability are these ideas of villains, something that is a tragedy, that all people with disabilities are suffering, that if they may have a superpower or that they're solely inspirational or that it's something to overcome. And I think it's really important to remember that stereotypes are formed and enforced through influence from our family, from our friends, and all forms of media and overall culture. Stereotypes about people with disabilities have historically been negative and largely untrue, and stereotypes can be very damaging. So I think, when we're thinking about, well, how do we go beyond stereotypes? How do we move past people having this bias and stigma toward those with disabilities? What the tropes that sort of go hand in hand with the sort of insidious and harmful stereotypes that are repeatedly reinforced are things like that disabled people aren't capable, that disabled people are burdens, disabled people can't achieve, or disabled people are warriors. So instead of thinking about these negative stereotypes, we're actually going to flip the switch today and really think about, well, how can we move forward? And it's not just ourselves that we need to move forward with. So obviously, many of you are allies, but some of you also might have a disability as well. And the continuous reinforcement of the stigma-driven stereotypes can actually result in internalized ableism. And that is the feeling that people with disabilities have within themselves, and they begin to actually believe the negative things that are said about them. And these can be reinforced by the biases and the stigma, and start to think that they are a burden, or that they are a drain on resources, or things are too difficult for them to achieve. So I think we've really got to make sure that this conversation is happening with everybody, not just with one group. So what leads to stereotyping of the disability community? Well, it's inaccurate media portrayals, it's the lack of authentic representation, and it's the discomfort of the non-disabled population around disability. So we know what we don't want for our students. So we don't want negative stereotyping constantly reinforcing these negative perceptions in both their work, their school environment, and obviously play. We don't want our students to see themselves reflected in not see themselves reflected in the world around them. We want accurate representation. We don't want our students to be made to feel like they exist to inspire others. And we don't want our students to minimize themselves to make others more comfortable. You know, and I think when we think about how can students with disabilities really fully benefit from inclusion, we want to make sure that when we're reinforcing different pieces, that impacts matter more than intent. And so we've got to make sure that we are really trying to dispel stereotypes and actually put forward people who are truly doing extraordinary things. And so one of those that I would like to introduce you to today is Isla Eckhoff. And I know that we've introduced you to many different people around in the disability community, but it would be dishonest not to admit that students with disability undoubtedly face challenges. So what role models can we put forward? And how can we have these role models really at the forefront of the work that we do? So Isla Eckhoff, this is a quote from her: "Resiliency is not about how you bounce back from a single event. It is how you respond to the challenges that life presents." And Isla is actually a managing director at BlackRock and founder of their Ability Network. She's also on our board at CPF. And it's really important to make sure that your children, students at your schools, have these incredible role models around them who truly are leaders in their world and leaders in the work that they do. So in this clip here, Isla gives us a look into her working life at BlackRock. And you'll hear this video using audio descriptions, which is really a best practice that makes video more content more accessible to those with visual impairments. And Isla truly has broken down stereotypes as an incredibly successful disabled woman working in the corporate world, which was pretty much male dominated for a very long time and really still is when we're thinking about financial services. And, you know, particularly she started her career before the ADA and without its protections. So here's Isla.
NYC at Work logo. On a blue background sits an apple with a silhouette of a cityscape. Text reads, NYC at Work. Text below reads, it's what I can do that matters. Fade into old photograph of little girl smiling on a metal playground seahorse.
I knew from the time I could talk to my parents about school that I would be going to college.
Photograph of teenage girl wearing blue cap and gown standing in front of a brick building.
And originally I wanted to be a doctor, but organic chemistry and I didn't get along very well. So after a semester in college and hating chemistry more than I thought I could possibly hate anything on earth, I changed my major to economics.
Fade into shot of woman with short curly hair in front of two computer monitors.
My name's Isla Eckhoff. I'm a managing director at BlackRock.
Shot of Isla working at her desk. Shot from below looking up at large building. Tilt down to reveal base of building surrounded by professionally dressed men and women. Sign on the building reads, BlackRock.
BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world. We have mutual funds, various investment vehicles that clients can invest in globally.
Inside the building, the office space is populated by cubicles full of people working. Cut to private office where Isla sits at her desk working. Her phone rings. She answers and continues speaking while working on her computer.
So I work in investment operations, so once the portfolio managers make a decision about what assets or investments they want to make, then all of those transactions need to be processed. And investment operations is responsible for all post-trade processing of all the trades that the portfolio managers execute.
Photograph of young Isla laying in bed with her hand holding her knee.
So I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when I was 2. Cerebral palsy is actually damage to the cerebellum part of your brain. I was born 2.5 months premature. My mother hemorrhaged all the way to the hospital, and as a result of that loss, that oxygen deprivation, I ended up with cerebral palsy.
Isla grabs a cane from the corner of her office and uses it to walk in front of the camera. When she walks, she has a limp.
My particular condition is from the hips down, so I'm not afflicted from the waist up, but it's very much attached to my gait and my walking.
Photograph of young Isla laying in bed, smiling at the camera.
Growing up, I had multiple between the ages of 2 and 16. So I missed 3rd and 4th grade entirely. I was sort of homeschooled with tutors, and I managed to come back after that 2-year period ahead of the rest of my classmates. So I was determined to keep up. In my desire to keep up, I actually came back ahead.
Shot of Isla's feet walking. When she walks, she puts pressure on the outer edge of her feet. She stops outside of an elevator with 3 other people standing there waiting. The elevator doors open and she enters with the others.
When you have a disability and you want people to accept you as you, right? You don't want to be accepted because it's Isla Eckhoff who has cerebral palsy. It's I want to be accepted for who I am.
In the elevator, Isla smirks as the doors open again and she walks out in front of 2 businessmen.
So I spent my entire life trying to make my disability disappear, meaning I had to be better, smarter, faster.
Shot of Isla's feet from behind as she's walking.
You know, and I know Isla really well, and there's a part of her story that she sort of touches on just there, saying, you know, she spent a lot of her life trying to make her disability disappear. And it really hasn't been until the last 5 years that she has embraced her complete identity as a disabled woman. And, you know, she really talks about what that has now added to her life, that she can come to work as her complete self. And, you know, so important that that's obviously what everyone is able to do. So I'll just moving on to the next slide. So obviously, you know, when we're thinking about the consequences of negative stereotypes, they are damaging to the self-worth of stereotyped individuals. They compromise education, employment opportunities. They encourage perpetuating stereotypical representation, and it minimizes access everywhere. So naturally, overwhelmingly negative stereotypes have overwhelmingly negative consequences. So it's really important they're addressed at the forefront of obviously any inclusion in schools. Because what do we want for our students? Well, we want them to be free of negative, inaccurate stereotyping surrounding disability. We want them to see themselves represented accurately in the world around them. We want them to benefit from accurate representation as they see disability stereotypes breaking down and fading away. And we want them to really feel empowered and included. So, because the disability community is both the largest minority group in the US and in the world, it intersects across every other identity. And the term intersectionality was actually coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 to describe how race, gender, class, and other characteristics intersect with one another. And she says the point of intersectionality is to make room for more advocacy and remedial practices to create a more egalitarian system. So today, intersectionality often means the overlapping of a person's identities, whether it be race, gender, ethnicity. Apologies, everybody. I have a 5-year-old who's joining us. So today, intersectionality often means the the overlapping of a person's identity, whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, religion, and or sexual orientation. These are often the basis for negative stereotyping and biases, and disabled people who are also a member of other underrepresented identities often experience stigma and discrimination based on the overlapping and interconnectedness of these identities. So another incredible member of the disability community that we'd like to introduce you to is actually Vasu Sujitra. And we've mentioned earlier tonight the common trope of disabled people being thought of as nothing but inspiring. There's definitely some nuance to that conversation, and we have to move away from the notion that people with disabilities are inspiring for simply existing or for doing mundane and ordinary things. But I think you'll soon see that Vasu is anything but mundane and ordinary. So, you know, it's a cool way of destigmatizing disability and legitimizing people for who they are.
I'm a skier, I'm a runner, I'm a ninja sticker, I'm an Indian American, I'm a disruptor, I'm a bridge builder, I'm Vasu Sojitra. I lost my leg when I was 9 months old to a blood infection called septicemia. It's almost like I was born with one leg, but not quite. I've been always told that I can't do things because of my disability, so I never actually listened to that, ever. My brother wanted to go snowboarding, and I was like, I want to come. The ski instructor wasn't really sure how to work with me, so me and my brother and friend just decided to go skiing on our own. I was falling all the time and whatnot. And then I started looking it up when I got home and started diving deeper into it, tried to convince my parents to get me some of this equipment, and kind of just snowballed into what it is now. When I was climbing the Grand Teton years ago, my friend was watching me place my crutches, and he was just like, holy shit, dude, this is like professional ninja sticking over here.
Slowly.
I kind of stuck to that phrase, and every time a kid asks me about my leg, I tell them, like, these are my ninja sticks. This is how I get up a mountain, and they kind of light up. So it's a cool way of, like, you know, destigmatizing disability and, you know, legitimizing who we are as people. Breaking boundaries means to me breaking the status quo as of what a disabled person is supposed to be doing, as well as break people out of their bubbles so we can build more empathy towards each other. I do my best, try to at least.
And so I think what you can see is when we're thinking about what disability representation looks like, it's really showing people in their true accomplishments, you know, doing things that, well, both of these people have obviously done truly extraordinary things, but it can also be in the everyday, but more to actually make sure that they are part of their authentic storytelling. So a question that we actually get asked a lot is, disabled people often do truly inspiring things. Can I not acknowledge them? Well, of course you absolutely can. But many will ask, what if the person is doing, you know, inspiring things, like obviously what Isla is doing and what Vasu is doing. And, you know, and I think the good litmus test to think about this is what the person is doing something you would consider inspiring if the person didn't have a disability. You know, going to the grocery store to pick up milk, is that inspiring? Not necessarily. However, hiking and climbing a mountain and then skiing down said mountain all on one leg, absolutely, that is very inspiring. You know, Isla, you know, breaking glass ceilings, being a woman in financial services, you know, growing up through the 80s and 90s, is that inspiring? 100%. So now I sort of want to take you down a little bit of a terminology path, and this is around the term inspiration porn. And this was coined by the late Stella Young, who was an Australian disability rights activist in 2012. And she stood by her use of the term porn, maintaining that she felt it appropriate because at its core, the function of inspiration porn is to objectify disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. And as you can imagine, over the years, Stella Young experienced a lot of backlash over her deliberate use of the word porn to draw a comparison. And this discussion has definitely continued even after her death. And these are some common examples. And, you know, it is jarring to hear, but she intended for it to be jarring, to get people's attention and to make people really rethink, you know, what are some of these things? So examples that you'll see on here. So what's your excuse again? The only disability is a bad attitude. Well, we know that that is not correct. Disability is actually a real, very valid thing that a lot of people experience. And it's not just about attitudes. And your excuse is invalid. And so all of these different things, again, are looking at really making the non-disabled population feel better about themselves. And this is just a quote from Stella Young. And I use the term porn deliberately because they objectify one group of people for the benefit of another group of people. So in this case, we're objectifying disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. For the purpose of these images is to inspire you, to motivate you so that we can look at them and think, well, however bad my life is, it could be worse. I could be that person. But if you are that person, how would that make you feel? So it's really saying if you are a disabled person that you are less than. And so I'm just going to show you a bit of an expert from Stella Young's TED Talk. It's one of the most popular TED Talks that has been done. And she really, truly was a remarkable, extraordinary and inspiring woman.
I grew up in a very small country town in Victoria. I had a very normal, low-key kind of upbringing. You know, I went to school, I hung out with my friends, I fought with my younger sisters. It was all very normal. And when I was 15, a member of my local community approached my parents and wanted to nominate me for a Community Achievement Award. And my parents said, that's really nice, but there's kind of one glaring problem with that. She hasn't actually achieved anything. Yeah, and they were right. You know, I went to school, I got good marks, I had a very low-key after-school job in my mum's hairdressing salon, and I spent a lot of time watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Dawson's Creek. Yeah, I know, what a contradiction. But they were right. You know, I wasn't doing anything that was out of the ordinary at all. I wasn't doing anything that could be considered an achievement if you took disability out of the equation. Years later, I was on my second teaching round in a Melbourne high school, and I was about 20 minutes into a Year 11 legal studies class when this boy put up his hand and said, "Hey, miss, when are you going to start doing your speech?" And I said, "What speech?" You know, I'd been talking to them about defamation law for a good 20 minutes. And he said, you know, like your motivational speaking. You know, when people in wheelchairs come to school, they usually say, like, inspirational stuff. Yeah. It's usually in the big hall. And that's when it dawned on me. This kid had only ever experienced disabled people as objects of inspiration. We are not, you know, to this kid, and it's not his fault. I mean, that's true for many of us. You know, for lots of us, disabled people are not our teachers or our doctors or our manicurists. We're not real people. We are there to inspire. And in fact, you know, I'm sitting on this stage looking like I do in this wheelchair, and you are probably kind of expecting me to inspire you, right? Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you dramatically. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to tell you that we have been lied to about disability. Yeah, we've been sold the lie that disability is a bad thing. Capital B, capital T. It's a bad thing. And to live with disability makes you exceptional. It's not a bad thing, and it doesn't make you exceptional. And in the past few years, we've been able to propagate this lie even further via social media. You know, you may have seen images like this one. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. Or this one, your excuse is invalid, indeed. Or this one, before you quit, try. Yeah. These are just a couple of examples, but there are a lot of these images out there. You know, you might have seen the little girl with no hands drawing a picture with a pencil held in her mouth. You might have seen a child running on carbon fibre prosthetic legs. And these images, you know, there are lots of them out there. They are what we call inspiration porn. And I use the term porn deliberately because they objectify one group of people for the benefit of another group of people. So in this case, we're objectifying disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. The purpose of these images is to inspire you, to motivate you, so that we can look at them and think, well, however bad my life is, it could be worse. I could be that person. But what if you are that person? I've lost count of the number of times that I've been approached by strangers wanting to tell me that they think I'm brave or inspirational. And this was long before my work had any kind of public profile. They were just kind of congratulating me for managing to get up in the morning and remember my own name. And it is objectifying. These images objectify disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. You know, they are there so that you can look at them and think that things aren't so bad for you, to put your worries into perspective.
You know, I think obviously, Stella was an incredible advocate for the disability community and really, I think, has tried to transform the imagery and the language that is shown around disability and thinking about how do we do accurate representation of disability. And, you know, I think it's exciting to actually see some of the progress that we're making. You know, there was, when you look at the Academy Awards that happened just recently, having somebody be awarded who actually does have a disability for their role in film, I think is, a really big step forward for what we're looking at for accurate representation. A lot of parents will say, but what about, I love talking about my child. I love showing people my child. And absolutely, I have 3 young children under the age of 5. And, I'm very proud of them every single day for everything that they're achieving. And that's okay as a parent. You can have those feelings. You can have all those different things because your children truly are wonderful to you and are doing, incredible things. But it's how do we create that narrative around disability and the outside world that is really important. So, when we think about accurate disability representation, it really is key to dismantling stereotypes and fostering true inclusion. It helps combat negative and inaccurate images and storytelling around disability that we see in the media, and it replaces the harmful inaccuracies with authentic portrayal stories and narratives, and places your students, your children, at the forefront of the conversations. So the process of breaking down stereotypes really is key to the success of inclusion, and any effort will likely fall short unless it works to actually do some of the unlearning in relation to negative biases, stigma and stereotypes. And actually what we need to do is have people relearn and reshape their perceptions around disability. So if we're thinking about unlearning our assumptions, how do we do that? What does that look like? So the world is full of assumptions made about people with disabilities and what they can and cannot do. And many or even most of these are driven by stereotypes. So as we work to dismantle the stereotypes, we actually allow ourselves to unlearn our assumptions, unlearn the different things that we have. And in a way means that we don't pass that down to our children. We don't pass down these sorts of assumptions that we may have had to others. Another, wonderful person to introduce you to is actually Jerron Herman. He is a professional dancer here in New York City, and his quote is, "Having a disability doesn't mean lowering expectation, it means raising the bar." Because some people think athletes need to look a certain way and perform a certain way, but he talks about fitness is for all of us. We just have different ways of doing it. And again, another great example is Troy Kotzer, who is actually no longer an Academy Award nominee, but actually an Academy Award recipient for Best Actor in the Supporting Role for his recent performance in the film Coda. So, wonderful role models and really incredible people doing incredible things across all different industries. And I think that's the really important piece when we're thinking about having conversations around disabilities. It's not just in one industry. It's not, for example, that everybody is a disability advocate. Isla is successful in financial services. You've got other people who are athletes. You've got people who are actors, performers, mothers. We really need to make sure we're showing the full breadth of the lived experience that people have.
If you think a trainer needs to look a certain way, needs to talk a certain way, needs to perform a certain way, then we need to rethink a couple things. Hi, I'm Jerron. I'm a professional trained dancer. I live in New York, and I happen to have CP. Although my CP affects the left side of my body, it has actually allowed me to improve my dexterity and agility on the right side to a degree that is unthinkable for most people. When they told me I wouldn't even be able to feed myself, I decided I was going to do everything in my power to show the world that they need to stop putting a cap on me. Having a disability doesn't mean lowering expectations, it means raising the bar. Because some people think athletes need to look a certain way and perform a certain way. But fitness is for all of us. We just have different ways of doing it. This is my evolution. What's yours?
So when we're thinking about breaking down stereotypes and we're thinking about, how do we move beyond the bias and stigma that a lot of people with disabilities experience, what does allyship look like, and particularly within the education system? There are fewer things more unhelpful than an ally who hasn't done their homework, or at the very least is not in the process of doing it. And I think, we've spoken about allyship as a lifelong learning experience, and it really is. And I think all of us can have a really big role on how we are allies to the disability community. And, continuing education. By being here today, obviously, you're already taking that step. Whether it be for your children or whether it be for yourself. But, a continuing education centered on disability history, the current issues that are faced by the disability community, and disability-focused own voices and their narratives are key. Process of becoming an ally, like who are you surrounding yourself by? Who are you hearing these stories from? So if I'm thinking about, what this looks like, it's voices raised alongside the disabled community, not on behalf of. And, I am actually doing a lot of this presentation on behalf of Ashley Harris-Whaley, who is the Director of Community Engagement, who actually unfortunately can't be here this evening. And really, we would have loved for her to be part of this conversation because it is really important to make sure that the disabled community is leading these conversations. We need to unlearn assumptions. We need to think about peer connections for disabled students, mentor connections for students with disabilities as well. Who are their mentors? Who are their role models? There are extraordinary people in the disability community that they can look up to. And, you know, what allyship is not is the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes. So thinking about those things that we may have encouraged in the past, you know, how can we stand up and say, actually, that is inaccurate? You know, let's actually put forward a more, you know, true and authentic representation and conversation. It's also to remember that this isn't just an adult conversation. Students should be included in all conversations around allyships because they can be wonderful allies. You know, when we're thinking about true friendships, where they develop, a lot of that happens in school. You know, people can create lifelong friendships in school and really have such influence as the next generation coming through. So this absolutely needs to go far beyond adult conversations and into student conversations as well. So actionable ways to maximise inclusion. So what can we do for and with our students? Well, we can engage them in the process of self-learning and self-education. Let's have conversations with all of them. And let's think about, you know, what's next. So what does Just Say Hi bring to the table? Well, it brings the work that is required for allyship. And Just Say Hi is our disability inclusion program that we have in schools. It's embedded in the concepts into every element of conversation, friendships, and leadership within the school environment. It was actually awarded a gold level anthem for diversity, equity, and inclusion this year in 2022. And, you know, we are very proud actually of that award because it really shows the effort that came from the disability community in fostering this content, but also many different allies, whether it be Teachers of the Year, School Counsellors of the Year. Obviously, the New York City Department of Education was, you know, really involved in the development of this curriculum. And it is a 3-part sort of curriculum, if that's sort of one way to look at it. And so, yes, it does actually deliver content to students with and without disabilities in the classroom. Obviously, families, we realise how important you are to this conversation, into building these relationships, into building a pathway forward for your children and for students with disabilities. And of course, educators and staff. You know, this conversation doesn't just happen with students. It doesn't just happen in the classroom or out in the playground. We need to make sure those teaching around disability are really aware of the different components and what they've had to learn, because chances are that that wasn't taught to them in schools, and chances are it wasn't even taught to them in college when they were doing their teaching degree. So it's really important that obviously educators have the professional development that they need to excel and really be able to deliver this content as well. So, you know, we hope it is time for you to really join in the conversation. And in schools, you know, we think of it that inclusion can start by anyone just saying hi, but it doesn't end there. You know, the more complex challenge comes in developing the appropriate supports and insights to allow students with disabilities a chance for a truly equitable educational experience. And, you know, this initiative really began with a focus on starting conversations, but it has evolved and continues to evolve. You know, we really see that both how being an ally is a lifelong learning experience. This program is a lifelong learning experience. You know, but it is a one-stop shop for those committed to initiating and nurturing change regarding disability inclusion, and change that we hope will cultivate a more inclusive, welcoming school climate while at the same time building accessible and inclusive systems that work for us all. So what can you do at your school? What can you do at your child's school? Spread the word about disability inclusion and programs like Just Say Hi among other parents or guardians of students with and without disabilities in your school community. You know, this isn't just for parents of students with disabilities. It's not just their responsibility to get this into schools. It really is all stakeholders. You know, advocate for bringing something like this to your school. Reach out to your school counsellor, assistant principal or principal and say, you know, what is happening around disability inclusion and education around disability. Engage your PTA leaders and think about, you know, family engagement webinars or activities, and obviously continue to advocate for disability inclusion in the best interest of the entire school community. You know, we say parents are really the strongest advocates and allies for their children. So, you know, you're all obviously here, as I said at the beginning, and, you know, we really thank you for being so welcoming actually to learn about the concepts that we've presented here today. And for any of you that do want to learn more about Just Say Hi and obviously the disability inclusion curriculum that we have, please reach out to Debbie Fink, who is our Vice President of Education and Inclusion. Her email is debbie.fink@yourcpf.org. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Let me figure out how to spotlight all of us. All right. So folks, now is the Q&A portion, so feel free to drop in your questions. I see a couple of hands raised, but so if you have a question, please drop it into the Q&A. And so I want to talk first about, for families, right? Many times, especially the families who are joining us tonight, having a child with a disability is that person's first experience with someone close to them with a disability. How do you have any ideas or tips on how folks can approach educating and like learning more about disability for the benefit of their own family first, right? Before like spreading it out to the folks around them. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. You know, my number one recommendation there is actually surrounding yourself by adults that have disabilities. And when I say surrounding yourself, think about where you're getting that in the education. There's incredible people on social media that are really elevating that discussion. There's organizations like ourselves that have, you know, people with lived experience really telling you about what it's like to have a disability. And I think if we can look to those people to be role models, if we can look to them obviously to learn from their experiences, I think it will actually go a long way. And I do think that's probably my number one recommendation. Obviously, you can also, you know, try to find those networks of other parents who are going through similar experiences, particularly if you've got young children. And, you know, this is really something new and something that you're sort of experiencing and feeling isolated with. Try to find your community. Try to find, you know, the people that are really going to hold you up and support you in the conversations, and understand really that disability and the conversation around disability, it's actually, you know, wonderful to see how far we've progressed, and that, you know, being part of the disability community is something to be proud of, and something that, you know, your children can really take, you know, great amount of, you know, pride in being.
So I think you're going to like this next question. And I know you addressed it a little bit, but what are some resources or programs that families can tap into when they're experiencing that folks at their child's school may not be the most versed in disability awareness, and they might find that, you know, they might be using some disparaging language, or maybe like not using person first language or identity-based language. What are some resources and tools? And I know you have one ready to go for families to suggest to schools.
Sure, absolutely. So we have, it's called our Just Say Hi disability curriculum. And, you know, this has really sort of been the focus of a lot of the different webinars that we've spoken about. This is the fourth webinar that we've done as part of this series, and it's going to be a total of 5. But it really covers all the different things when we're thinking about disability. So at first it looks at what is disability, and then we go into disability history and laws, because it's really important for people to understand where we've come from. And, you know, that will help us understand the work we have to do. And obviously within laws, there are laws to protect those with disabilities from discrimination, from bias, and from stigma. And it's really important that we are all aware of them, and how we can continue to facilitate to make sure that they actually are getting done within schools. And obviously, you know, you spoke about the power of language and facilitating that. And it is so important when we're thinking about the language that we're using. You know, how we've got a sort of saying at work, how we think and talk about disabilities has a really big influence how other people think and talk about disabilities. So, you know, that's a big part of the curriculum that we have. And it's from pre-K to 12. And so it covers all the different pieces. And it's also for teachers, for leadership, and for families as well. So please reach out to Debbie Fink to learn more about it if you're interested.
There's a really interesting question in here that I'm going to reframe slightly. I think a lot of times when we talk about disability, it's really easy to focus on physical disability. And so how do you suggest managing expectations when disabilities are really unique to each person, right? And thinking specifically like to folks who may have learning disabilities, right? Or emotional disabilities. So people's life plan might look differently, right? Based on how their disability manifests in their life, right? So I wonder if there's anything you want to talk about how to frame life and positivity for folks based on the diversity of folks' disability.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you've used the word there, diversity, right? And thinking about individualized pieces, and particularly within the school system and those different pieces, you know, we're not saying, you know, treat everybody the same. And we sort of spoke about, there's a rule called the platinum rule, right? And the platinum rule really looks at, let's treat others how they want to be treated. And I think when you're thinking about those with intellectual disabilities or anything else, they still have the right to be treated the way they want to be treated, and, you know, have the right to have a seat at the table and have a right to be able to try to describe how they're feeling. They may do it in a different manner. You know, it may be done in a non-verbal way. It may be done, you know, identifying what they enjoy or what they don't enjoy. But, you know, every person and every student has a right to be able to have that expectation put on them, and also has the right to be able to be facilitated to be able to, you know, express how they're feeling and express what they're doing. And I think this is where, you know, the IEP and obviously all those different things are so important to make sure that your child is getting the individualized program that they need.
Yeah, I think it's also really important, not to piggyback or anything, but I think it's also really important to like understand that like the narrative of life is that we all have different wants, needs, goals, right? And I think you hit it on the head when you're talking about the platinum rule and treating people how they want to be treated. In the same way, when you're thinking about limitations or lack thereof, it's based on what that person wants, right? So it's no good to say, my child should have the opportunity to be an astronaut if your child doesn't want to be an astronaut, right?
Yeah.
We should be focusing on where people want to go and what they want to do, and figure out what the supports we need to do to put in place to help them get there, right? That was just me having a monologue moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think it's such an important part of the conversation. You know, we were speaking about the power of language last week, and there's an incredible mother, Tiffany Hammond, who has a quote. She has autism, and her son is autistic. And you know, she says, I am happy to say, you know, she uses identity first language. So really sort of puts disability at the forefront of what she does. And her son actually does the opposite. But understanding, you know, that they both have very different preferences on how they describe their disability and how they see it impacting their world, and that they both have very different needs. And I think that's the important piece in all these conversations as well. You know, when somebody has met a person with a disability, they've met one person with a disability. And so really thinking about how we embrace the diversity in these conversations, how we embrace everybody's thoughts and wants. And I suppose that's what we're really trying to do within this curriculum, within the school system, to say, okay, everybody's experiences are different. Let's have open dialogue. Let's have open communication. You know, let's really create such a welcoming environment and community, which we'll talk about next week. And you know, take it to that next level. It's not just about process anymore. It's really about, well, how do we create these wonderful, you know, communities where everybody feels like they're part of it.
There's an interesting question here around internalized stereotypes. And so how do parents work with their children to, you know, work against internalized stereotypes, and I think internalized phobias, right? Because I think that's where stereotypes come from, and maybe internalized prejudice, because we are seeing not so great messaging all over media, right? Social media, TV, videos. How do parents work against that, to like work with their children and you know, work against those internalized stereotypes?
I think first and foremost, it's important to have these open conversations with your child. And if they don't feel comfortable talking to you, and particularly we know, you know, with mental health right now as well, you know, I want to put an asterisk next to this. If you feel like your child is in crisis with any of these moments, you really should be thinking about how do we move forward with, you know, getting them the help that they need if there is a crisis situation. But if we're just thinking about more of these sort of internalized dialogue and, you know, how do we start rethinking within ourselves, accurate representation. I just think, you know, the constant, whether you want to call them microaggressions or the bias and the stigma that people feel, leads to people feeling, okay, well, this is actually who I am and this is my true identity. You know, I'm being reinforced it all the time, but accurate representation can go a long way to actually dispel those myths within yourself. When you actually see someone who potentially looks like you, or, you know, has the same disability as you, or is even just part of the disability community in general, you know, really doing other things other than those sort of internalized things that you're feeling, you know, it can help that you can believe in that you can do them as well. And I think that's a sort of one of the most powerful things that you can do for any of your students. You know, find those role models. As I said, there are extraordinary people doing extraordinary things within the disability community, you know, that truly are, and we can say the word inspiring when they are doing inspiring things. And you know, make sure your children have that around them. Make sure they have that representation that they can look at and they can understand that, all right, that could be me. I can do those different things as well.
I love what the speaker you shared, was her name Stella? I can't remember.
Stella Young.
Yeah, she said something like, I was being congratulated just for waking up and remembering my name. And that's like, that made me laugh, because it's true. We do that to people. And the reality is, I love what you just said. It's totally fine to be inspired by people who do inspirational things. Yeah. We can't just put people into a position where we're just inspired for their existence, right?
And social media, I feel like, you know, and just sort of to that point, for families and students, when you're thinking about what your child is looking at on social media, potentially what they are being exposed to, you know, maybe do a check-in, and some things that you might be like, oh, that's not harmful, that's not, you know, dangerous, that's a great quote. Just have a look at the underlying meaning to make sure that it's not these sort of tropes that are being reinforced around what she was saying, because some of it, you know, I've definitely been guilty of being scrolling you through and like, oh, that's cute, or that's something like that. But then actually when you read the underlying meaning, you're like, oh, that's actually very harmful. So that would just be a little bit of a tidbit and I suppose for parents to think, all right, let's look at a little bit deeper at to what some of our children might be looking at.
I also want to add to that and say that, like, I think we also need to challenge our own notions that consuming media is a passive experience. I think we do have the opportunity to like shut down the show, switch the channel, all of those things, and maybe being a little more conscious about what we're watching things. And if we're saying that, you know, certain shows, certain videos, certain content creators on social media, whatever, are just not making the cut, we actually have a choice in whether we consume that media or not, right? And just maybe being a little bit more intentional about that is, I think, really important. I know I made that big, for me, it was a big decision to make when a while back when I was saying, I'm not going to watch shows that don't have diverse representation, right? And if I'm not seeing people of all walks of life, or I think I don't want to watch that show because it's not based in reality. When I walk out in New York City, I'm not seeing just one type of person, right? So I think that I just wanted to put that plug in there for that like we do have some control and some power, and we should reclaim that.
Absolutely. I think that is such a powerful piece. And, you know, we have a list of over 1,000 incredible books. So that there's books, there's storybooks, everything from what would be appropriate for someone in pre-K up to grade 12. You know, you've seen some of just the wonderful things online that you can find through media, but there's also now really great representation, whether it be in documentaries, whether it be, you know, as I said, looking at what just won an Oscar yesterday, or the day before. You know, that these are wonderful stories that are now getting told, and they're getting told because of accurate representation. And so it's great to see that shift, but you're 100% correct. We have control over what we see. We have control over what we view and who we sort of put at the pinnacle of who we would see as an expert on these different pieces.
Oh, well, we're at time, and I'm going to close this out with this question because I think it's a good tie-in for next week. How do we raise the bar? And so I want to encourage folks to join us next week for another session with CPF, because we do it through community building, right? And community organizing and sharing content like this. And I want to say to folks that sharing the link to this recording is a great way to start raising that bar. And, you know, calling people into the work is a great way. I know I asked the questions and I answered it, but Rachel, anything you want to add?
I would just say, you know, if you haven't watched the 3 previous webinars, you know, while you can watch this obviously as a standalone, it is a series, and some of the questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A, you know, we really addressed in some of those other webinars as well, when we're talking about the power of language, when we're talking about, you know, how we would respond and how we would react in some different ways. Yeah, it's all there. So please go back and watch it. And otherwise, I'm really looking forward to next week. And as you said, really bring it all together, thinking about what is it really going to take to create welcoming communities. And yeah, I think the first step is that everybody's here tonight, and just so thankful to all the parents who, you know, putting this as a priority and putting it first. And as I said, you are your students and your children's best allies. So, you know, you're all doing wonderful things, and they're lucky to have you.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And Debbie, I know you've been in the background answering questions in the Q&A, but if families want to learn more about Just Say Hi, who can they reach out to?
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for being here with us. Rachel, great job. Jose and Ori and your whole team. We just love partnering with you. You can reach out to me directly at CPF. My email is debbie.fink@yourcpf.org. That's DEBBIE .F as in flower, INK as in kite @yourcpf.org. And I'd love to work with you to get this in front of your principal, your assistant principals, so that we can really work towards moving this into your schools to create a welcoming, inclusive community for your child and the entire community, because everyone benefits.
Thanks so much, Debbie and Rachel, and we're looking forward to having you all back again next week and wrapping
And
up.
one final thing, a
Yeah,
huge
go ahead.
Greenie Dixon, who is our ASL interpreter. You know, she is beyond amazing, being able to keep up with me because I do speak fast, and you know, she really is wonderful, and we're so thankful for what she brings to these webinars.
And while we're doing plugs for Greenie, if you have not joined early enough to see Greenie sign our our song of the day, listen, I really challenge you to be here right at 7 o'clock next week so that you can experience the Greenie experience. So thank you so much to everyone. Thank you everyone for watching, and then, you know, take care, and we'll see you all next week.
We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye.